Right now, tourists are sipping cocktails inside 500-year-old walls, posting sunsets to Instagram, calling this place magical. And it is. But the stones beneath their feet were laid by enslaved hands. The harbor they're photographing once held so much stolen gold that the Spanish crown had to invent new mathematics just to count it. And those pretty cannons pointing out to sea? They were fired in the largest naval battle ever fought in the Western Hemisphere, a battle so catastrophic it helped birth the United States of America. This is Cartagena de Indias, not the postcard, the real thing. A city built on a genocide, sustained by slavery, defended by desperation, and somehow against every law of history still standing. Over 200 years, more treasure passed through this single port than existed in all of Europe combined. Every major empire on Earth tried to take it. None succeeded. This is the story of the most important city you've never truly understood. It is the 20th of January 1533. You are standing on a narrow strip of land between two lagoons on the northern coast of South America. The air smells of salt and mangrove rot. Around you, a calamari fishing village, maybe 2,000 people, canoes on the water, smoke from cooking fires. Children, in 6 hours, it will be ash. Pedro de Heredia rides in from the west with 150 soldiers. He has one instruction from the Spanish crown: find a deep water harbor on this coast, build a city. The natives here, the calamari, the zenu, have lived along these lagoons for over 1,000 years. That history ends this morning. The village burns in under an hour. What Heredia found beneath the ruins and in the surrounding jungle was staggering. Zenu burial mounds packed with gold, not nuggets, not dust, but worked gold. Masks, figurines, funerary offerings representing centuries of craftsmanship. His men dug up an estimated 200,000 pesos de oro in the first weeks. That's roughly $15 million in today's value. In weeks, from graveyards. He named the settlement Cartagena after the port city in southeastern Spain and sent word back to the crown, "I have found the place." He had no idea what he had actually found. The location was almost supernaturally perfect, a natural bay protected by a narrow entrance, a lagoon system that could shelter an entire fleet, a position at the exact point where ships from the Pacific trade routes, the interior river systems, and the Atlantic crossing all converged. Within a decade, Spanish engineers would understand what the calamari had always known. This was the hinge point of an entire continent. But in 1533, Heredia just saw gold. He was not wrong. He was only seeing the beginning. By 1550, Cartagena has become something with no precedent in human history. The loading dock for an entire civilization's plunder. Picture the system. Silver extracted from Potosi 4,000 meters up in the Bolivian Andes, in mines where indigenous workers die at a rate of roughly 1 per day, gets smelted into bars, loaded onto mule trains, carried down through jungles and across rivers to the Pacific coast, shipped north to Panama, carried overland across the isthmus by more enslaved laborers, loaded onto galleons at Portobello, and sailed northwest to Cartagena. Here it waits, in warehouses, in counting houses, under guard. Then the flota arrives, the treasure fleet. Once, sometimes twice a year, a convoy of up to 90 ships drops anchor in the bay. The loading takes weeks. Accountants, priests, and royal officials descend. Every bar is weighed, stamped, registered. The king's fifth, the quinto real, a 20% tax on all extracted treasure, is separated and sealed. Then the fleet sails for Havana, and from Havana across the Atlantic to Seville between 1,550 and 1,650. Historians estimate that approximately 181 tons of gold and 16,000 tons of silver passed through Cartagena. Those numbers are almost meaningless at scale. So here's a comparison that lands. The entire gold reserve of medieval Europe was roughly 150 tons. Cartagena moved more than that in a single century, and the silver dwarfed the gold. The city that grew around this process was extraordinary and grotesque in equal measure. Grand cathedral, ornate governor's palace, merchant houses with Andalusian courtyards, and iron balconies. And underneath all of it, the slave trade. Cartagena was designated the primary port of entry for enslaved Africans into Spanish South America. Between 1533 and 1810, more than 1 million people passed through this harbor in chains. The city's wealth and the city's horror were the exact same thing, inseparable, flowing through the same streets. A Jesuit priest named Pedro Claver spent 44 years meeting slave ships at the dock, giving water and medicine to people who had survived the Middle Passage. He baptized an estimated 300,000 people. The church later made him a saint. The trade continued regardless. If you are moving this much wealth through one bottleneck, the entire criminal world will eventually point itself at that bottleneck. And it did. Sir Francis Drake English privateer, national hero, state-sanctioned pirate sails into Cartagena harbor with 23 ships and 1,800 men. The city's defenses are, at this point, essentially non-existent. Drake's forces come ashore at night, march through the darkness, and take the city in a single assault. No major battle. No heroic last stand. The governor flees, the residents flee. Drake walks into the governor's palace and sits down. He stays for 107 days. Every morning, his men systematically strip the city. Every evening, a Spanish negotiator rows out to Drake's flagship to discuss ransom. Drake's opening demand, 107,000 ducats. The Spanish counter, 25,000. Drake responds by burning one city block per day until the price is met. Slowly, incrementally, with bureaucratic patience, he destroys approximately 200 buildings before the Spanish find the money. He leaves with 107,000 ducats and everything portable of value he could carry. The Spanish crown is furious, but the crown is also, in a deeper sense, embarrassed. The richest city in the New World fell to a single English captain in one night. This cannot happen again. Drake's raid triggers one of the most ambitious construction projects in colonial history, and it will take 150 years to complete. The man who designs Cartagena's salvation is Bautista Antonelli, an Italian military engineer in Spanish service. He arrives in 1586, surveys the terrain, and presents a plan so vast and expensive that the crown initially balks. Antonelli's proposal: completely encircle the city with walls, not a fort. Walls, 11 kilometers of them, up to 17 meters high and 20 meters thick in places, with interlocking bastions, a moat, and an outer ring of forts controlling every approach by sea. The construction begins in 1586 and does not end until 1796, 210 years of continuous fortification. The human cost is staggering and almost entirely invisible in the historical record. Enslaved Africans and indigenous laborers quarry coral, limestone from the seabed. They carry blocks weighing up to a ton through tidal shallows in the heat. Workers die of disease, of exhaustion, of accident. No one records their names. The walls rise regardless. What emerges is a military engineering masterpiece. The Castillo de San Felipe de Barajas, begun in 1536, massively expanded in the 1650s, sits on the hill of San Lazaro, 40 meters above sea level, with interlocking tunnels designed to amplify sound so that defenders can hear enemy footsteps through the stone. The outer harbor is controlled by two forts on opposite headlands, with an iron chain strung between them at the waterline that can be raised to block any ship from entering the bay. European military experts who visit in the 1700s call it the most impregnable fortification in the Western Hemisphere. They are not exaggerating. It will be tested exactly once at full scale. The 13th of March, 1741. You are standing on the walls of Cartagena, watching the horizon fill with sails. Not a few sails, not a fleet. A horizon-spanning armada, 186 warships, 2,000 cannons, 23,600 sailors, and 12,000 soldiers. This is the British Empire at full military extension, the largest naval force ever assembled in the Western Hemisphere, under the command of Vice Admiral Edward Vernon, a man so confident of victory that the British Parliament has already minted commemorative medals showing the Spanish governor on his knees. Defending the city, approximately 3,600 men, 6 warships, and one extraordinarily capable Spanish commander. His name is Blas de Lezo. He has one eye, one arm, and one leg each, lost in separate battles over 3 decades of naval warfare. He is 52 years old, in constant pain, and absolutely calm. Vernon opens with a naval bombardment that lasts days. The outer forts take damage but hold. He lands troops to assault Castillo San Felipe directly. Lazo lets them come. The British soldiers advance up the slope in tight formation. European battle doctrine fully engaged and walk into a killing ground. The castle's design, with its interlocking fields of fire, means there is no approach angle that isn't covered. The assault fails. Then another. Then another. Vernon writes home to England. Victory is imminent. He is not lying. He genuinely believes this. After 67 days, the British fleet withdraws. The losses are catastrophic. Estimates range from 18,000 to 20,000 British dead, the majority from yellow fever and dysentery rather than Spanish guns. Vernon loses more men at Cartagena than the entire British army will lose at Waterloo 74 years later. The commemorative medals are quietly melted down. Blas de Lezo dies 4 months after the siege of illness contracted during the fighting. He never receives a triumphal reception. The Spanish crown, embarrassed by how close it had come, downplays the victory. Lezo's name nearly vanishes from history. The geopolitical consequences are enormous and almost entirely forgotten. Britain, humiliated and bankrupt from the failed siege, cannot afford to project power in the Caribbean for a generation. The breathing room this creates for the British colonies in North America, reduced imperial pressure, diverted military resources, becomes one of the unacknowledged preconditions for the American Revolution 35 years later. Cartagena didn't just survive. It accidentally helped create the United States. The walls that kept the British out could not keep history out. By 1800, the Spanish Empire is rotting from the inside. Napoleon has invaded Spain, the crown is in chaos, and in Cartagena, a new generation of Criollo intellectuals born in the Americas, educated in European Enlightenment philosophy, deeply tired of sending wealth to a collapsing empire, begin meeting in secret. The 11th of November 1811, Cartagena becomes the first city in what is now Colombia to declare absolute independence from Spain. Not autonomy, not reform, independence. The declaration is signed in the same government buildings built with stolen gold and slave labor. The contradictions are not lost on everyone. Among the most radical voices in the independence movement are free Afro-Colombian men who understand exactly what liberty needs to mean. The Spanish response, when it comes, is savage. In 1815, a reconquest force of 15,000 soldiers under Field Marshal Pablo Murillo lays siege to the city for 106 days. Inside the walls, the population, around 18,000 people at the siege's beginning, starves. Residents eat leather, rats, whatever survives. Somewhere between 6,000 and 9,000 people die before the city surrenders. The survivors call it El Sitio de Siege. Murillo executes the independence leaders publicly and sends their heads to other cities as warning. He fails to understand that he has just created martyrs. Simón Bolívar retakes Cartagena in 1821. The city that launched the empire's wealth is now the city that helped end its rule. Walk through Cartagena's old city today, and you are walking through a document.